The evening was calm. The grand mansion stood tall under the golden lights. The servants moved quietly, carrying trays of food and drinks. Guests walked through the long hall, admiring the beauty of the house. The billionaire woman, Madame Li, welcomed everyone with her graceful smile. She looked like a queen in her elegant dress, but deep inside her heart was restless. A new man had entered her life. He called himself Mr. Han. He spoke with charm. He dressed like a gentleman, and everyone believed he was a powerful businessman. Madame Li believed him too, or at least she wanted to, because after her husband's death, her life had become lonely. The mansion was full of laughter. The guests talked, the music played softly, and Mr. Han stood near Madame Li, whispering kind words. He told her she looked beautiful. He told her he wanted to protect her. The people around smiled, thinking they looked perfect together. But someone in that house saw something different. It was the maid's daughter, Mai, a simple girl with sharp eyes. She had grown up inside that mansion. Her mother worked there for many years, and Mai always stayed close, watching the world of the rich and powerful. She did not speak much, but she listened, she observed, and she never ignored the small things that others forgot. Mai noticed how Mr. Han's smile never touched his eyes. She noticed how his fingers tapped nervously whenever someone mentioned Madame Li's late husband. She noticed the phone calls he made in the garden, speaking words she did not understand, but Mai knew languages. Her mother taught her Chinese, and that night, when she heard him whispering in Chinese, her heart jumped. He was not who he said he was. His accent was wrong. His words were dangerous. He was pretending. Mai's young heart beat fast. She ran to her mother. But her mother was busy serving drinks. No one wanted to listen to a maid's daughter during a party. So Mai stood there, shaking, watching Mr. Han smile at Madame Li, watching Madame Li trust him more with every second. Finally, she gathered her courage. She walked forward, her steps soft but full of fear. She looked at Madame Li, her voice low but urgent, and in Chinese she whispered, "He is not who he says he is." The words cut through the air. Madame Li's smile froze. Her face turned pale. Her hand trembled as she held her glass. She looked at Mai with wide eyes, confused and frightened. Why would the maid's daughter say something like that? Why in Chinese? What did she know? Mr. Han turned his head slowly, his eyes sharp like a knife. He looked at the girl with a smile that hid his anger. He pretended not to understand. But in his heart he knew the girl had seen something. The guests continued talking, unaware of the storm rising in that hall. Madame Li excused herself. She touched Mai's shoulder and whispered back in Chinese, asking her what she meant. Mai's eyes filled with fear. She wanted to speak. She wanted to explain everything she heard. But Mr. Han was watching, his gaze heavy, like a warning. Madame Li felt her chest tighten. She had trusted Mr. Han. She had allowed him into her home, into her life. But now the words of a young maid's daughter shook her soul. What if it was true? What if this man was not who he claimed to be? The hall suddenly felt colder, the lights too bright, the music too loud. Madame Li forced a smile for her guests. But her mind was racing. She kept replaying Mai's words. She kept seeing the pale fear in the girl's face. She wanted to ask more, but the moment was gone. Mr. Han leaned closer, pretending to be gentle, whispering again, "Are you all right, Madame Li?" His voice soft. But behind the softness was something else, something dark. Mai stepped back, her small hands shaking, her heart screaming that danger was inside the house. But no one listened. She was only a maid's daughter. Her voice had no power, yet her warning had already planted a seed of doubt inside Madame Li's heart. The guests clapped as the music changed. Laughter filled the hall. But Madame Li's eyes were empty, her face pale. She no longer heard the joy around her. All she heard was the whisper, "He is not who he says he is." And from that moment, nothing in the mansion would ever feel safe again. The next morning, the mansion was quiet. The sound of birds filled the garden. But inside Madame Li's heart there was no peace. She kept remembering Mai's whisper. She kept seeing her pale little face. She kept hearing the warning, "He is not who he says he is." But when Madame Li walked into the dining hall, there he was, Mr. Han, dressed in a fine suit, reading the newspaper, smiling like the most honest man in the world. He stood up quickly, pulled out a chair for her, and spoke with care. "Good morning, Madame Li, I hope you slept well." His voice was calm, his smile warm, his hands steady. He looked like the perfect guest, the perfect gentleman, the perfect stranger. The servants admired him. They whispered how lucky Madame Li was to have such a man around. They said he was rich. They said he was powerful. They said he cared for her more than anyone since her husband's death. Madame Li nodded politely, but inside she was torn. She could not forget the girl's words. Mr. Han continued his charm. He spoke about his travels, about his business, about the people he met. He told stories of Shanghai, of London, of New York. His words were smooth like silk, everyone listened, and everyone believed. But Madame Li began to notice small cracks. When he spoke about Shanghai, he called a street by the wrong name. When he described London, his accent slipped. When he spoke of business, his facts did not always match. But he laughed it off. He said he was tired. He said he misremembered. And the servants accepted his excuses. Madame Li forced a smile, but in her mind she remembered her husband. Her late husband never forgot details. He never made mistakes in his stories. And yet this man who claimed to be a great businessman made small mistakes again and again. Mai, the maid's daughter, moved quietly in the background, carrying plates, pouring tea, her eyes never leaving him. She watched the way his fingers drummed the table, the way his eyes searched the room before he spoke, the way he avoided certain questions. Madame Li caught Mai's eyes, and in that silent moment, she felt a connection. She felt the girl was right. But how could she prove it? How could she challenge him when everyone else saw him as perfect? Later that day, Madame Li walked with Mr. Han in the garden. The flowers were blooming, the air was sweet, and his voice was soft. "You must be lonely," he said. "I only want to keep you safe. I only want to protect you." He touched her hand gently. Her heart raced, not with love, but with confusion. Could she trust him? Could she risk believing him? His words made her feel cared for, but Mai's whisper burned inside her ears. The perfect stranger looked into her eyes, his face kind. But deep within his eyes was something else, something that did not belong, a shadow she could not name. At night, the mansion glowed with lights again. Friends and business partners arrived, and once again Mr. Han stood tall, shaking hands, laughing with everyone, telling stories. Everyone loved him, everyone praised him. He looked like a man who belonged, but in truth, he did not. Mai walked through the hall carrying a tray of drinks. She stopped when she heard him whispering to a guest in low voice. His Chinese was broken, his accent was false. He slipped a paper into the man's pocket, then laughed loudly to hide it. Mai's small hands shook. She wanted to tell Madame Li right there. She wanted to shout. But she knew the guests would laugh at her. They would say she was only a maid's child. So she stayed silent, waiting for the right time. Meanwhile, Madame Li noticed something too. She saw how Mr. Han never spoke of his family. He never spoke of his true home. Whenever she asked, he changed the subject. He talked about her instead, about her wealth, about her future, always about her, never about him. He was like a mirror, showing her what she wanted to see, but never showing himself. That night, when the guests had gone, Madame Li sat alone in her room, her mind heavy, her heart restless. She remembered Mai's whisper again, and she asked herself, why would a maid's daughter lie? She looked out the window. She saw Mr. Han in the garden, talking on his phone, his voice low, his body tense. She could not hear the words, but she saw his face, and for the first time, she saw not a gentleman, but a mask. The perfect stranger was not perfect at all, and the doubt inside her heart grew stronger. As the moon rose higher, Madame Li promised herself she would watch him carefully. She would not let him take control of her life so easily. She smiled at the thought, but deep inside she knew, this was only the beginning, and the truth was far darker than she imagined. The mansion was beautiful, the nights were calm, but danger was walking inside the very walls, smiling, laughing, pretending. The perfect stranger was waiting, and soon, his mask would begin to break. Days passed inside the mansion, but Madame Li could not find peace. She smiled in front of her guests. She laughed when Mr. Han told his charming stories, but inside her heart, doubt was growing. Mai's whisper echoed every night. He is not who he says he is. Mr. Han continued to act like the perfect gentleman. He was polite, generous, and kind. He brought flowers to Madame Li. He told the servants to rest. He even gave small gifts to the staff. Everyone admired him. They said Madame Li was lucky. They said she should marry him, but only Mai kept her eyes sharp. Strange things began to happen, small at first, but impossible to ignore. One evening, important documents disappeared from Madame Li's office. Her late husband's files, papers about land and investments. The servants searched everywhere but found nothing. Mr. Han blamed the staff, saying they were careless, but Mai noticed his smile as he said it. Another night, Madame Li heard whispers in the corridor. She opened her door and saw Mr. Han walking quickly with a stranger. A man she had never seen before, their voices low, their steps fast. When she called out, Mr. Han laughed and said it was just a lost delivery man, but his eyes looked uneasy. Mai saw more than anyone. She watched how Mr. Han disappeared into the library late at night. How he locked the door. How he whispered on his phone in a language not all the servants understood. But Mai understood, because her mother had taught her Chinese. She listened from the shadows, her heart beating fast. The words were strange, codes, numbers, names of banks. It was not the language of a businessman. It was the language of someone planning something secret, something dangerous. Mai wanted to scream, but she held her tongue. She knew if she rushed, no one would believe her. Madame Li tried to silence her own doubts. She told herself maybe she was overthinking. Maybe grief for her late husband was making her suspicious. But when she looked at Mr. Han, she felt a coldness inside, because he never spoke of his own past. He only asked about hers, about her money, about her late husband, about her business. One evening, Madame Li sat in her study. She looked at her husband's photograph, her eyes full of tears. She remembered his words, "Trust is precious, do not give it easily." And she realized she had given trust too quickly to a man she barely knew. She thought about her husband's old enemies, men who once tried to take his empire. She remembered the threats, the warning letters, the attempts to cheat him. Could Mr. Han be connected to them? Was he sent by someone from the shadows of the past? Meanwhile, Mai grew more restless. She followed Mr. Han one night as he walked into the garden. She hid behind the trees and saw him meet a tall man in black. She saw them exchange an envelope. She saw Mr. Han count money under the moonlight. Her small hands trembled, her throat dry. She wanted to run to Madame Li, but she knew if she shouted without proof, he would twist the truth. The next day, Madame Li noticed something terrifying. A painting on the wall was slightly moved. Behind it was a small safe. The safe where her husband kept his most private documents. She opened it with shaking hands and saw the papers were gone. Only one folder remained, a folder half empty. Her blood ran cold, her lips dry. She turned to see Mr. Han entering the room, his smile wide, his tone calm. "Are you all right, Madame Li? You look pale," he said softly. But in his eyes, for just a moment, she saw a flicker of something dark. That night, Madame Li called Mai into her room. She asked her again, "Tell me, child, why did you say he is not who he claims to be?" Mai's eyes filled with tears. She spoke carefully. "Because I heard his words, I heard him in Chinese, and his words were lies. His name is not Han, his life is not real." Madame Li's heart pounded. She held Mai's hand tightly. She wanted to believe, but fear chained her. If it was true, then she had invited a snake into her home. If it was true, she and everything she owned were already in danger. The mansion that once felt safe now felt like a prison. Every corridor had shadows. Every laugh of Mr. Han felt like a threat. Madame Li smiled for him during the day, but at night she cried in silence, her mind torn between fear and disbelief. And in the corner of the garden, Mr. Han made another secret call, his voice low, his tone sharp. "She suspects nothing. The plan is working. Soon everything will be ours." But he was wrong. Madame Li was beginning to see. Mai was beginning to act. The shadows of the past had returned, and the storm was just beginning. The mansion was alive with movement again. Guests arrived for dinner. Laughter filled the hall. Music floated through the air. Madame Li smiled and welcomed everyone. Her dress sparkled under the lights, but inside her chest, her heart carried a heavy weight. She could not forget Mai's trembling words. She could not ignore the missing papers. Mr. Han walked beside her like a shadow, his suit perfect, his voice charming, his gestures calm. He shook hands with the rich, he charmed the powerful, and everyone admired him. They whispered that Madame Li had finally found happiness. But Madame Li herself was not at peace. Her doubts grew every time he looked at her, his eyes too sharp, his smile too perfect. Mai, the maid's daughter, moved quietly through the hall, holding a tray of glasses. No one paid attention to her. To them she was only a servant's child. But in truth, she saw more than anyone else. She was the silent observer, the watcher in the shadows. She noticed how Mr. Han touched Madame Li's arm a little too firmly. She noticed how he avoided direct questions about his past. She noticed how his eyes flickered toward the library door again and again, as if guarding a secret inside. Later that night, when the guests were distracted, Mai slipped out of the hall. Her small feet carried her down the long corridor. She pressed her ear to the library door. Inside she heard Mr. Han's voice, low and cold, speaking on the phone. His words were in Chinese again, his accent clumsy, his tone dangerous. The documents are almost mine. She suspects nothing. The transfer will happen soon. Her fortune will be in our hands. Mai's blood ran cold. She pressed her hand against her chest, afraid her racing heartbeat would give her away. Suddenly the door creaked. Mr. Han stepped out. Mai darted behind a pillar, holding her breath. He looked around, his eyes scanning the corridor like a predator. For a moment, she thought he had seen her. But then he turned away, his steps echoing down the hall. Mai released a shaky breath, her small body trembling. She knew now without doubt. He was lying, he was dangerous, he was planning something against Madame Li. But she had no proof, only her ears and her eyes. Who would believe a maid's daughter over a charming rich man? The next morning, Madame Li sat in the garden with her tea, her mind restless. Mai approached carefully, her hands folded. "Madam, I must tell you something," she whispered. Madame Li looked at her with tired eyes. Waiting, Mai leaned closer and said, "He spoke again last night. He said he will take your fortune. He is not safe." Madame Li's hand shook as she placed the cup down, her voice low. "Child, are you certain?" Mai nodded firmly, her eyes full of fear but also courage. Madame Li's heart squeezed. She wanted to believe. But Mr. Han's face, his kindness, his words, they all pulled her into confusion. That evening, Madame Li decided to test him. During dinner, she asked him a question about her late husband. A story only true friends would know. "Do you remember the charity ball 10 years ago, when my husband saved the orphanage from closing?" she said softly, her eyes watching his face. Mr. Han's smile froze for a second, then returned quickly. "Of course, such a noble act, unforgettable," he said smoothly. But his answer was vague, too vague. Madame Li's stomach tightened. She knew he did not truly know. Mai, standing near the wall with a tray, noticed the flicker in his expression. The small slip that others ignored. Her heart whispered, "He is breaking." Later that night, she followed him again, her steps soft, her breath silent. She saw him in the garden once more, meeting the same mysterious man, exchanging another envelope, whispering about accounts and transfers. This time, she saw his face under the moonlight, not the face of a kind gentleman, but the face of a man full of greed, full of lies, full of secrets. She wanted to run to Madame Li right then, but suddenly the stranger turned, his eyes catching a shadow in the bushes. Mai ducked down, holding her breath, her body shaking, her hands gripping the grass. The man whispered something to Mr. Han, suspicion in his voice. Mr. Han's eyes narrowed. He scanned the garden slowly. Mai prayed in silence, prayed they would not find her. After a tense moment, they walked away, their voices fading into the night. Mai crawled back to the safety of the kitchen, her heart racing, her cheeks wet with tears. She knew she was walking on the edge of danger. But she also knew she could not stop, because Madame Li's life, her fortune, her trust, all of it was being trapped by a stranger's lies. And Madame Li, lying in her room that night, stared at the ceiling, hearing the echo of her husband's words again. "Do not give your trust easily." The mansion was quiet, but inside its walls, secrets were moving like shadows. The silent observer had seen too much, and soon, the truth would no longer stay hidden. The morning sun entered the mansion through tall windows. Golden light fell on the marble floor. The servants moved about with quiet steps. But Madame Li's heart was restless. She could not sleep the whole night. Mai's words echoed in her ears. The memories of missing papers haunted her, and the flicker of fear on Mr. Han's face during her test would not leave her mind. She knew she had to be careful. She could not accuse him without proof. He was too clever, too smooth, too perfect in front of others. If she spoke too soon, he would twist her words and make her look foolish. So Madame Li decided to build a trap made of questions and lies. At breakfast, Mr. Han sat at the long table, reading the newspaper, his smile calm as always. "You look tired, Madame Li," he said softly. "Perhaps you need rest. Perhaps you need someone to take care of you." His voice was sweet, but his eyes searched her face like a hunter searching for weakness. Madame Li forced a smile, her mind steady. "I was only remembering the past," she said gently. "My late husband told me stories of his secret investments. He wanted me to protect them." Her words were careful, her tone calm, but the story was false, it was bait. Mr. Han's eyes lit up for a moment, too quickly. Ah, yes, investments. Your husband was a wise man. Perhaps I could help you with them, he said eagerly, his voice smooth. But Madame Lee noticed the greed hiding behind his charm. Mai, moving silently in the background, caught the shift in his tone. Her young heart pounded. She knew Madame Lee was testing him, and she prayed the woman would be safe. That afternoon, Madame Lee invited Mr. Han into the study. She placed a locked box on the table, her hands steady though her heart raced. This box holds my husband's secret papers, she said firmly. Only a man I truly trust should ever see inside. Her eyes locked on his face, waiting for his reaction. Mr. Han's smile grew wider. His hand brushed the box as if it already belonged to him. You can trust me, Madame Lee, he said smoothly. I will guard this with my life. But Madame Lee knew the truth. The box was empty. It was another trap. A way to see if his greed would reveal itself. She left the room, saying she needed to prepare for dinner. But in truth, she waited outside the door, her ears sharp, her breath silent. Inside the study, Mr. Han's voice dropped. He spoke quickly on the phone. The box is here. She believes me. Soon the rest will follow. Madame Lee's blood ran cold. Her hand pressed against her chest. She had no more doubts. He was a liar, a thief, an imposter. That evening, the mansion was full again. Guests gathered in the hall, music played, laughter echoed. Mr. Han walked proudly beside Madame Lee, acting like the master of the house. But Madame Lee's mind was sharper than ever. She smiled at him. But inside she was preparing her next move. Mai moved among the guests, carrying trays, her eyes following Mr. Han. She saw how he charmed the men with business talk, how he flattered the women with sweet words, how he always kept one eye on Madame Lee's jewels, her documents, her fortune. At one moment, Madame Lee stepped forward and told a story to the guests. My husband once said, she began with a smile, that a true man never fears questions about his past. Then she turned to Mr. Han and asked in front of everyone, tell us, where did you first meet my late husband? The hall grew quiet, all eyes turned to Mr. Han. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned quickly. Of course, at the charity gala in Hong Kong, he admired my business, he trusted me, he said, his voice strong. But his answer was wrong. Madame Lee knew her husband never attended that gala. Her heart clenched, her suspicion turned to certainty. She forced a gentle laugh to cover her discovery. But inside she knew, this man was dangerous. Later that night, when the guests had gone, Madame Lee sat alone in her room, her hands trembling. She whispered to herself, I must be careful. He will not forgive suspicion. I must protect myself and my. Meanwhile, in the garden, Mr. Han stood in the shadows with the same mysterious man, his voice sharp. She is almost mine, but the maid's daughter is watching. She must be silenced before she ruins everything. Mai, hiding near the trees, heard every word, her breath caught in her throat. Her body froze, fear gripped her like ice. She ran back to her small room, her heart racing, tears in her eyes. She knew now the danger was not just for Madame Lee, it was for her too. And Madame Lee, staring out her window, saw Mr. Han looking up at her with a smile that no longer looked kind, but cruel. Behind it was a warning, behind it was a threat. The trap had been set, but it was no longer clear who was trapping whom. The nights in the mansion grew heavier. The silence carried secrets. Madame Lee's heart no longer trusted the calm. She felt danger in every corner. Every smile of Mr. Han felt like a mask. Every word he spoke felt like a lie. And Mai's frightened eyes told her that the storm was close. One evening, while the servants prepared dinner, Mai slipped into the library, her small hands trembling, her breath shallow. She had seen Mr. Han hide something inside the desk. She knew it was risky. But she could not stay silent anymore. She searched the drawers quickly, her fingers brushing through papers, and then she found it. A folder, thick with documents. Inside were copies of Madame Lee's property papers, account details, and even her husband's old contracts, some stamped with false signatures. Mai's eyes widened, her throat dry. This was proof. This was the truth. He was stealing everything. As she turned the pages, something fell out, a small passport, dark red cover. She opened it with shaky hands, and her heart almost stopped. The photo was Mr. Han's face. But the name was different. Not Han, not the man he claimed to be, but another identity, another life. Tears filled her eyes, fear wrapped around her. She pressed the passport to her chest, whispering, he is a fraud, he is a thief. She wanted to run straight to Madame Lee, but before she could, the door creaked open. Mr. Han stood there, his tall frame blocking the light, his smile calm but his eyes sharp. "Little girl," he said softly, his voice like poison. "What are you doing in here?" Mai froze, her hands hiding the passport behind her back, her legs weak, her heart pounding loud enough for him to hear. She stammered, "I was only cleaning." But her voice shook. Mr. Han stepped closer, his smile fading, his hand reaching out. "Give it to me," he said coldly. Mai shook her head, tears streaming down her face. She tried to run, but he grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. "You think anyone will believe you," he hissed. "You are nothing but a maid's daughter. Your words mean nothing." At that moment, the door burst open again. Madame Lee stood there, her eyes wide, her face pale. She had come to speak with Mai. But now she saw everything. She saw the fear in the girl's eyes, the grip of Mr. Han's hand, the hidden paper behind her back. "Let her go." Madame Lee's voice shook but carried power. Mr. Han released his grip slowly, his smile returning as if nothing had happened. "She was only frightened," he said smoothly. "I was helping her." But Madame Lee's eyes had already caught the truth. She saw the passport in Mai's trembling hand. She stepped forward, took it, and opened it, her breath catching as she read the false name. Her knees weak, her world spinning. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Who are you really?" Mr. Han's mask cracked, his smile fell away, his eyes turned cold. "I am the man you invited into your home," he said firmly. "The man you trusted, the man who will take everything you own." Madame Lee gasped, her hand shaking. The truth cut her like a knife. She had let a snake into her heart, into her house, into her life. Mai clutched her arm, whispering, "I told you, madam. I told you he is not who he says he is." The imposter laughed, a cruel sound that echoed in the library. "Do you think anyone will listen to you now, Madame Lee? The world believes I am your future. Your friends believe I am your partner, and soon the law will believe I own your fortune." His words were heavy with arrogance. Madame Lee's face turned pale, but her spirit did not break. She held the passport high. "This is the proof. This is your end," she said bravely. But even as she spoke, she felt the danger rise. His eyes darkened, his hands clenched, the air in the library turned tense. Mai pulled Madame Lee back, fear gripping her small body. She whispered, "We must go, he will hurt us." But Madame Lee stood firm, her eyes locked on the imposter. For the first time, the mask was gone. The perfect gentleman had vanished, and in his place stood a stranger, a criminal, a thief who had tricked them all. Outside, the mansion was quiet. The guests had left, the servants asleep. No one heard the truth being revealed inside the library. No one saw the danger that now stood face to face with Madame Lee and Mai. Mr. Han stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "You should not have looked behind the mask, Madame Lee. Now you will pay the price." Mai held Madame Lee's hand tightly, her young voice trembling. "We cannot let him win, we cannot." And in that moment, Madame Lee understood. The battle had begun. The truth had come out. But the fight for survival was only just starting. The library lights flickered, shadows danced on the walls, the night grew darker, and the mansion no longer felt like home. It felt like a trap. The library was heavy with silence, the air thick with fear. Madame Lee stood frozen with the passport in her hand. Mai clung to her side, trembling, and across from them stood Mr. Han, no longer smiling, no longer gentle, his mask fully gone, his eyes dark and cold. "You should have stayed blind," he whispered, his voice low but sharp. "You should have enjoyed the comfort I gave you, but now you have chosen war." Madame Lee's lips trembled, but her voice came steady. "You lied to me. You entered my house with false words. You touched my life with dirty hands. Who sent you? Who are you really?" Mr. Han laughed, a cruel laugh that made Mai shiver. "Names do not matter, Madame Lee. Power matters, wealth matters, and you, with your fortune and your empire, are nothing but a prize. I came to take what I deserved." Mai stepped forward, her small voice breaking the silence. "You will not win, we know the truth now," she said bravely though her knees shook. Mr. Han's eyes narrowed. He looked at her with a glare so sharp it cut the air. "A maid's daughter dares to challenge me," he hissed. You should have stayed in the shadows, little girl, your silence could have saved you. Madame Li pulled my close, her arms protective, her fear turning into fire. If you harm her, I will destroy you, she said fiercely, her voice louder than she expected. Mr. Han's steps echoed as he walked closer, his presence heavy, his shadow long on the floor. Destroy me, he mocked. The world believes in me. The world respects me. You are alone, Madame Li. Your friends love my charm. Your staff obey my orders, who will stand with you. But Madame Li did not move back. She held the passport high again. This is enough to end you, she said firmly. The world may love your lies, but the law loves the truth. For the first time, anger burned across his face. His voice rose. Do you think I will let you walk out with that? He snapped, his hand reaching forward. Mai gasped, her small body blocking Madame Li, her voice shaking. Stay away, I will scream, the whole mansion will hear. But Mr. Han only smiled again, a smile full of cruelty. Scream if you want, no one will come. I made sure the servants are asleep. I control everything in this house now. His words sent a chill through the air. Madame Li's heart raced, but she refused to bow. You control nothing, she said coldly. My husband built this house on truth, not lies, and truth will win. The tension rose like fire, shadows danced on the walls, Mai's hands shook, but her spirit grew stronger. She whispered to Madame Li. We must find help, we must escape before he silences us. Mr. Han's laughter filled the room again. Escape, he said slowly. Where will you go? The gates are guarded. The phones are mine. Every step you take, I see it. His words cut like knives. Madame Li's body trembled, but she stood tall. You are wrong, imposters always fall. Liars always fail. You may have fooled my friends, but you will not fool me anymore. Mr. Han's face darkened. He leaned closer, his voice a hiss. Then you leave me no choice. In that moment, the door opened. The sound of footsteps broke the tension. An old servant entered carrying a tray. His eyes widened at the scene. Mr. Han straightened quickly, his smile returning. Ah, thank you, place it here, he said smoothly, hiding the storm inside. The servant placed the tray and left, unaware of the war raging in silence. The door closed, and Mr. Han's mask slipped again, his voice cold. This is your last warning, Madame Li, give me the papers, or you and your little shadow will regret it. Mai's small hands clutched Madame Li tighter, her voice fierce. We will never give you anything. The imposter's jaw tightened, his eyes burning. The game of masks was over, and the real battle had begun. That night, Madame Li locked her room. She held the passport close, her hands shaking. Mai sat beside her, whispering, We cannot wait, we must fight back, we must end this before he ends us. Madame Li nodded slowly, her eyes filled with fire and fear. Tomorrow, she whispered, tomorrow everything changes. Meanwhile, in the dark garden, Mr. Han stood with his mysterious partner, his voice sharp like a blade. She knows too much, the girl saw too much, we must act soon, before the sun rises on my downfall. The partner nodded, their faces hidden in the night, and their plan was set. Inside the mansion, two sides prepared for battle. Madame Li and Mai with courage and truth, Mr. Han with greed and lies. The mansion no longer felt like a home. It felt like a battlefield, and when the morning came, one side would fall. The night grew deeper, the silence sharper, and the final confrontation was close, closer than anyone in that house realized. The night passed heavy and long. Shadows crawled across the mansion walls. Madame Li did not sleep. Mai sat beside her, their hearts restless, their ears sharp for every sound. They both knew the danger was close. The imposter was planning something, and the mansion was no longer safe. As dawn broke, the first light touched the garden, but instead of peace, it brought tension. Madame Li looked at the passport again, her hands trembling. This is the key, this will expose him, she whispered. Mai nodded, her young voice soft but brave. We must use it before he takes everything, we must act now. Downstairs, Mr. Han moved like a master of the house. He gave orders to servants with confidence, his smile calm. But inside his heart burned with rage. He knew Madame Li had the proof. He knew Mai had seen too much. He knew his mask was breaking, and he had only one choice left, to strike before they destroyed him. That evening, he invited Madame Li to the dining hall. The table was set with golden plates. Candles flickered. The atmosphere looked elegant. But the air carried danger. Mai stood close behind Madame Li, her eyes never leaving him. Mr. Han's voice was soft, but sharp beneath the surface. You seem distant, Madame Li. You seem troubled. Perhaps you no longer trust me, he said, his smile tight. Madame Li met his gaze, her voice steady. Trust is broken when lies enter, and you, sir, are built only on lies. Her words cut deep, her courage stronger than her fear. For a moment, silence filled the hall. Then Mr. Han's hand slammed the table. The plates rattled, his smile vanished. Enough, he roared. I gave you comfort, I gave you security, and this is how you repay me. His voice thundered through the room. Mai stepped forward, her small body trembling, but her voice firm. You gave nothing but fear. You wanted her fortune, you wanted her life, but you will not win. Mr. Han's eyes blazed, his anger uncontrollable. You little rat, he hissed. I should have silenced you the first day. He moved closer, his steps heavy. But suddenly Madame Li raised her hand, the passport shining under the candlelight. This is your end, she declared. Your false name, your false life, everything will be exposed. The police are already on their way. Mr. Han froze, his eyes wide, then narrowed. You lie, he spat, but doubt flickered across his face. Madame Li's voice did not shake. You think I would face you without calling for help? You think I would let you destroy me without a fight? She said with fire in her tone. At that moment, footsteps echoed outside. The heavy knock of law officers. Voices calling, open the door, police. The sound shook the hall. Mr. Han's face twisted with fury. He lunged forward, trying to snatch the passport. But Mai darted in front of Madame Li, her small hands clutching it tight. No, she screamed, her courage brighter than her fear. The doors burst open. Police officers rushed in, their voices commanding, step back, hands in the air. Mr. Han struggled, his eyes wild, his voice shouting. She is lying, I am her protector, she loves me. But Madame Li stood tall, her voice clear. He is an imposter, he came to steal everything, the proof is here. She handed the passport and documents to the officers. In that moment, Mr. Han's lies collapsed. His mask shattered completely. The officers restrained him. His arms pulled back, his shouts echoing through the hall. You will regret this, Madame Li, you and that girl, you will regret it. But Madame Li no longer trembled, her face pale yet strong. Mai clung to her side, tears falling, but they were tears of relief. The officers carried him away, his footsteps fading. The mansion quiet once more, the storm had passed. Madame Li sat down slowly, her body weak, her eyes filled with tears. She looked at Mai and whispered, You saved me, child, you saved my life, you saved my future. Mai shook her head, her voice soft. I only spoke the truth, madam, the truth you were brave enough to face. Madame Li took her hands, holding them tightly. Never again will I doubt the small voice that speaks with honesty. Never again will I ignore the warning of a pure heart. The mansion breathed again, its walls no longer heavy with secrets. The shadows cleared, the danger gone. News spread quickly, the world learned the story. The charming stranger was nothing but a criminal. His empire of lies crumbled, and Madame Li's name rose higher, not because of her wealth, but because she stood against deceit. And Mai, the maid's daughter, was no longer invisible. Her courage became known, her voice respected, her truth honored. The night that once carried fear now carried peace. The mansion stood tall, its lights shining not with wealth, but with safety. And as Madame Li looked at Mai with soft eyes, she whispered again, If not for you, my life and fortune would be gone. The girl smiled faintly, her young heart strong, and in that moment, both knew, the impostor was defeated, the truth had won, and their lives would never be the same again.